The breakup of the former Defense Department Office of Acquisition Technology and Logistics took another big step this week. Defense News reports a memo from Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan makes the changes to the Office of Acquisition and Sustainment and Research and Engineering official and details who does what inside each organization. Peter Levine is Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Defense Analyses. David Berteau is President and CEO of the Professional Services Council. And John Young Jr. is Principal at JY Strategies. Gentlemen, thanks all very much for joining me. Peter, I'll start with you. What's your sense of what you saw about this memo from Secretary Shanahan and how it comports with what the NDAA laid out requiring the split?
So I think the memo is fine as far as it goes. The organization charts are all in order. It complies with the statute. What we have to recognize, though, is that power and influence in the department are not really a matter of organization charts. What we have to do is see over time what the offices do, how they go about it, who they work with, what kind of disputes they get into, and how those disputes are resolved. And that'll really show us how these new organizations are working.
Dave, what did you see when you read the memo?
There's two things that's really worth paying attention to. One is that this implements the second of 2 years worth of changes in organization. The first one of which, the previous year's National Defense Authorization Act, moved responsibilities for major defense acquisition programs for the most part back to the military departments. So you have to look at this in the context of that, and it moves forward on both of those objectives. One which was to bring cost, schedule, and performance of major programs more under control, direct control of the military departments. The second is to focus a lot on innovation. There's a third opportunity here that I think is critical. It's not very clearly in the intent of the NDAA, except in the use of the word sustainment. And that is an additional focus on sustainment, not just on advanced technology. And really by splitting it up, you have the opportunity to have that new focus and to bring technology in as part of that sustainment focus.
John, your takeaway from this?
I thought the acquisition and sustainment structure was familiar to the previous structure, and I think that provides stability for the major acquisition programs that are ongoing. The research and engineering structure adds these new jobs that are focused on quantum and hypersonics, and so I think that'll bring some focus to some key technology areas for the department. So there's a positive to that. That'll need to change over time.
The positivity that you say there is something that I've heard throughout kind of the discussion since we learned about this. What does this actually do, though, to getting the department closer to fast acquisition and deployment of those kinds of technologies, John?
You know, candidly, I'd have to say to you that people manage programs, not paper. So I don't think this has a big impact on speed. And I think OSD is going to struggle to have an impact on speed because of what was mentioned. The services now control the budget, the program milestone decisions, and execution of the programs. OSD is kind of sitting on the sidelines trying to influence it. This was driven by the Congress, and I must tell you, I have some concerns about that. OSD has a role to play here in terms of jointness and interoperability and avoiding duplication. And it's going to be key to the leadership of this team to execute it and use their team members to accomplish those goals.
If I could,
Peter.
Something that's not often recognized is that for the last 10 years or so, we've actually done very well on cost and performance on our major weapon systems. I have to say it goes back to when John Young held the position of acquisition technology and logistics. But in that period since John was there, we've had a 10-year period when we've had remarkably better performance than we did before. And so we have to worry, are we going to have backsliding there? Not just are we going to improve our performance, but can we hold to the level of performance that we've had?
Dave?
John's absolutely right in terms of speed and timing here, because there's nothing in this organization structure that inherently brings new technology to apply to systems, new systems, any faster necessarily than it's done before. And in fact, with the independence that the military departments have now, it may add an additional complexity to bring that speed into place. But if you take those same offices, artificial intelligence, hypersonics, et cetera, and look at ways to incorporate developing technologies from those investments into existing platforms through modernizations and upgrades of those existing systems, you could cut a decade out of fielding these things. That's the opportunity. The organization doesn't mandate it, but it does provide the framework in which it can happen.
In fact, what you have to do in order to achieve what Dave is talking about is you have to spend money on different things.
Right.
And so what you need to look at more than the organization, more than the process, is the resource decisions. And what worries me is we have people talking about innovation and rapid experimentation, rapid prototyping, do we see a lot of money going into that? And if we don't see a change in the way we dedicate our resources, we're probably not going to see a change in the results.
So here's my concern, and this is to anybody who wants to address it. When our potential adversaries, especially as laid out in the National Defense Strategy, have an acquisition system that essentially consists of a dictator saying do it and it gets done, is all of this maybe just overthinking and maybe not radical enough for what the threat landscape looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
I think there are a couple of issues to consider there. One is, set aside the new organization, does this leadership team empower program managers and program executive officers to take risk, to try to reduce the documentation and the other things that distract from the things you're talking about, focusing on what we need for the future and accelerating the development and delivery of those things?
And the research and engineering side of this doesn't own the solicitation, evaluation, and award side of the process. So you've separated those two out now. And there's nothing in the data that suggests that DoD is moving faster, either in turning requirements into solicitations and issuing them, or turning solicitations into award and performance. You're absolutely right, Francis. I mean, when China and Russia can do in 3 weeks what it takes us 3 years to do, they're not going to become like us. We have to become more like them.
Peter?
Well, I would have a little word of caution on that, though, because if you're going to build a next generation bomber, it's going to take 15 years to get it designed and built. The Chinese aren't going to make that happen any faster by having a dictator, because it takes that long to get through the technology and the process. That's why I say that a real key is what some of my colleagues talked about earlier, which is looking at things that are shorter cycle, places where you can add technology, where you can modify programs. And I think that requires a more flexible and more agile way of investing resources. And so I really think you need to come back to the resource decisions. If the new Undersecretary for Research and Engineering controls significant resources, which he can move around and move to technology programs and technology problems that matter, then I think you'll see results.
Peter, David, John, we have to leave it there. Thanks all very much for joining me.